Maybe you can help me because I'm on a desperate bid to find like professionals to make me look smart because I'm not.
You're in the wrong place, but I'll try.
Trust me, you could, if you were like half a lobotomy, you're better than I.
Okay.
But I just felt like, does anybody search for truth anymore? Does anybody care? You know, my comedy was based on, I would make fun of political correctness. I couldn't
Right.
stand the Marxist elements of not allowing me to have free speech, to
Right.
be able to use logic and reason.
Right.
This is who I was. And it created my comedy career. And people were just amazed, like I was some genius. It's like, no, I'm just going back to what we used to do called communicating.
Right.
And using truth
Right.
and dealing with logic and
Right.
common sense that was common
Sure.
to everybody. We don't have that anymore. We have very much a control of narratives, a control of language to not really allow us to find truth.
Right.
And yet, it's a very old question, what is truth? So you would call yourself what, a Christian, an evangelical?
Christian, evangelical, yeah.
Okay.
Millennial,
And your whole life, or is it something
Born
you
and
came
raised.
Okay.
Born and raised in
Okay.
a Christian home.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you married a Jewish woman?
Yeah, a Messianic Jewish woman, so a Jew.
So does that make you Jewish?
Half.
It makes you half Jewish.
Yeah.
Okay, and
Yeah.
which is really your wife is the
Right,
half. So
right.
you're really not at
Not
all.
really, no.
You don't even eat
German and Polish,
anything.
yeah.
You don't bagels. You probably can't eat.
Can't.
Just the whole.
It's
You can eat that,
unacceptable,
but
yeah.
that's about it. Well, tell me then about this whole idea of Israel, because I was trying to find a subject
Right.
that people seem to just be black or white. And I
Right.
thought, should I do abortion? I said, yeah, nothing more fun
Right.
than sitting around on Netflix looking for a good old abortion documentary.
Right.
You know, exciting, fun, and plus bring the family.
Sure.
So, and I thought, well, that's a little this and that, and they thought, well, maybe climate change, and then somebody would get angry at me because somewhere a polar bear would drown. So I thought, Israel, because everybody knows of it, but I don't think everybody's quite as expert at it or as knowledgeable as how they feel about it as some of these other issues. I said, here's an issue that maybe we can see if we can find an answer here, because we have two very divergent views.
Right.
And we're Americans, and I grew up a Christian too, so I was taught, you know, numerous things, one of which is you have to support Israel or you go to hell, and if you don't do nice things to Israel, then bad things happen to you. So this is kind of how I was taught, and I thought, well, that's fine. But I never researched this. I mean, I don't know if that's a biblical command. What is Israel? Is it the Israel that we're looking at now, the one that was in the Old Testament? I don't know. That's how stupid I am. So I need you to make me look really smart. And the smarter things you say, if I repeat them, we'll cut that out and make it sound like I thought of them.
Got it.
Is that okay?
Good.
So I got a couple things about this issue that I'm hoping you can help me in, because my understanding is you have some experience. Can we keep it down back there? I'm sorry. I brought some pet rodents, and they're going to do a little dance here in a moment. But one of the things that I was in talking to some of the folks from various backgrounds, and there's a couple areas that people seem to be very confused by. They don't seem to have answers, and I heard that you might.
I'll try.
Very simple. 3-letter concept, BDS. It means boycott, divest, sanction.
Right.
Am I right about that?
You got it. So far, so good.
Okay. And so it's something that I guess isn't completely unique. I guess South Africa, wasn't that similar use of what was used to South Africa to try to demand them to depart from the apartheid concept?
It was.
Tell me about BDS when it refers to Israel.
Got it. Well, you know, I think, like you rightly said a minute ago, Israel is one of the defining debates in America, certainly on college campuses, and absolutely within millennial Americans. Why Israel to the far left? The far left in academia, in this society, and globally, have found a way to use the Israel narrative, the image of Israel, of a powerful white European people moving into an Arab land, capturing a people's land, taking over their neighborhoods, their villages, decimating a culture.
By the way, they're calling Jews a powerful group of people.
Right. So
I'm trying to think of the time
irony,
historically when Jews were overtaking continents.
anything.
But, okay.
The irony is, Israel was established not because of the Holocaust. The Holocaust didn't lead to the establishment of Israel, but Israel was something that happened shortly after the Holocaust. Jews literally crawled out of death camps all over Europe, and their only hope in the world was to move to then Palestine, Israel,
Okay.
back to their homeland, their biblical and historic homeland. And yet the narrative immediately is that these powerful white Europeans are coming to take over a people's group.
So they were refugees.
Refugees, absolutely,
Okay.
obliterated in Europe, even in the Americas.
And they couldn't
not
return to their
accepted.
own Polands and Czechoslovakias and
No, because
Russias.
the anti-Semitism that led to the Holocaust continued to exist.
Okay.
So
they had no place to go.
anti-Semitism did not die with Nazism. It went underground in Europe, and actually today it's kind of seeing a resurgence there, here, everywhere.
Okay.
So the American left has used the image of Israel, of powerful white people taking over an underprivileged Arab minority,
Okay.
obliterating them, decimating them, and building this powerful country on their gravestones. It, in many ways, mirrors the debate that's raging in the United States about privilege and haves and have-nots.
Okay.
Of kind of, we see people like Bernie Sanders running for president using the haves versus the have-nots, the rich and the poor,
Yeah.
the white and the dark. And so to the far left, Israel is the perfect representation
Okay.
of white power over an indigenous brown people.
So white, not necessarily Jewish.
Not necessarily Jewish in the larger narrative, but Israel just so happens, when you take a snapshot of an IDF soldier defending his home, his neighborhood, from Hamas or from some other terror group, that snapshot is deceptive. And to young people who see a snapshot of an IDF soldier standing over a Palestinian village, oftentimes they'll compare it to a brutal cop in America's inner city, of drawing the parallel between a Palestinian and a young African American man maybe walking down the street of Ferguson,
Okay.
of a soldier and a police officer. That narrative's been drawn, and so as such, Israel is the perfect place for the far left to attack kind of their views on inequality, on racism, on all these things. So on campuses, the Palestinian students on campuses across the country have built for themselves a network of other minorities, of other oppressed peoples. Oftentimes it's the far left Mecha kind of Latino
Now,
organizations.
isn't normally far left Jews?
No, I mean, Jews are a very diverse people with
Okay.
left, right, and center. A lot of Jews are very far left on many issues.
Yeah.
But this is a different kind of leftism. It's almost fascism. It's fashioning together these coalitions of students who have nothing else in common except for the narrative of oppression.
Okay.
So Palestinian students on campuses across the country have built together a network of other oppressed peoples, self-defined. Those people then have taken on, like I said, the narrative of Israel being the great oppressor in the world. And so the BDS movement is, according to them, an attempt at undermining and driving a wedge between America and Israel.
Because America historically has supported them, so they were thinking if we can get rid of America's power, militarily providing them that protection and or weapons or whatever, then they can, attack Israel, end Israel, destroy Israel?
The goal of the BDS movement is clear. It's to undermine the Jewish state, to weaken the Jewish state to the point that it will no longer exist, either demographically, financially, militarily, whatever it takes. There's a hatred for Israel that exists. And the goal of the BDS movement is to undermine Israel.
Okay.
The immediate goal, boycott, divest, sanction, is economic impact. They want to undermine economic relationships, make
Right.
it difficult for businesses in the United States and in the West to do business with Israel.
Right.
They want to make it difficult for pension funds to invest in companies doing business in Israel. They want to take the South African model and apply it to Israel,
Right.
which in my mind is obscene, but it's what's happening. They've defined the good and the bad, and they want to destroy the good. And
the end game is that there is no Israel,
I think
or
so,
that
yeah.
or that Palestinians are given, back maybe land that they believe was theirs.
It's all of the above. At the end of the day, it's very clear. The stated goals of the Palestinian leadership on campuses in Palestine around the world is to undermine Israel, its ability to defend itself, its ability to provide for itself, and to exist.
Okay.
It's a clearly defined goal. And it's actually having an impact, a scary impact on college campuses
So would
today.
that be more of an empowerment of, like you said, a minority, the dark-skinned Arab, I guess, or Palestinian, sort of overtaking their oppressors and showing that we can overcome and become, self-sufficient? So is it more like that, or is it anti-Semitic because they've chosen a very specific group
Right.
who frankly haven't had a lot of countries
Right.
in their life
Right.
and in their history?
Yeah.
So I'm curious about, is
Right.
there some sort of, what is it about Jews
Right.
that everybody just can't leave these people alone?
I don't get it. I don't get it.
I mean, I don't know.
Right. No, well, it started off, I think, as a political movement, the idea was to undermine Israel. Very quickly, though, it slipped into kind of that nasty history of anti-Semitism. They have a hard time kind of separating the two.
Right.
Look at UCLA today.
Yeah.
It's a campus that has 30% population of Jewish students. They have a third of their faculty being Jewish.
Right.
Most of the buildings are named after Jews. By the way, these are all Jewish community leaders,
Right.
most of whom have
And
very...
LA's always had tons of Jewish.
Absolutely, it's Westwood.
Of
It's
course.
Westwood. It's a
Yeah.
Persian Jewish, and it's a very Jewish community. On UCLA today, there are groups of students, like we talked about earlier, Palestinian, African American, Latino, who have made it their political goal to undermine Jewish groups on campus, to spread vicious lies and rumors about Israel, and especially Jewish residents in Israel, to drive a wedge between any community and the Jewish community, to yet again isolate the Jew and everybody else. At UCLA, this is happening. I'll tell you a quick story. 2 years ago, a BDS resolution was passed, was brought up to the student government. 12 hours of debate, 12 hours of vicious lies about Israel. Israel sterilizes Ethiopian immigrants. Israel murders people just because they feel like it. Israel drops bombs on nurseries and on orphanages, just to prove a point. 12 hours of these vicious lies. And by the way, in between their hatred for Israel came up a lot of anti-Western, anti-American, anti-Christian debate as well. But it was all focused on Israel. So there are 2 students on the student council who voted in a private ballot, but later it became public. I don't know, it sounds a little Saul Alinsky to me, but it becomes public. Within seconds, within hours, within minutes, these students are threatened, getting phone calls from, and this is all documented, by the way, getting phone calls from blocked numbers saying, we know where you live, we know who your family are, watch out. On campus, people would cuss them out, flip them off, spit on them as they'd walk to their classes. These are 2 non-Jews. These are 2 non-Jews who dared to stand with Israel. This happened at UCLA.
2 years ago.
This was 2 years ago. By the way, the administration's response was deplorable. It was half-hearted statements of, on campuses we have freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Students that wish to express themselves on these issues are free to do so, whatever that means. So here we have 2 non-Jewish students being threatened, being bullied, being really targeted based on their political views. It's the idea that you can't have any view on campus other than the one that the population has.
Which, by the way, in any other context would be considered a hate crime.
Exactly.
And the way these people are being treated.
Exactly. And so you imagine the hatred that 2 non-Jews experience based on their stance for Israel.
Yeah.
Think about the hatred that exists for Jewish students that stand up for themselves, that stand up for Israel, that say, you know what, I love Israel, and you know what, I stand in Israel's court, and you know what, by the way, Israel's morally right in what they do, even in the way Israel makes war. Israel has a right to exist, a right to defend itself.
Why?
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 You can take it a few different ways. You can take it from the historical perspective that says that Jews always had a place in the Holy Land. That's proven beyond the shadow of a doubt with archaeology, historical texts. History proves.
Is it the same Holy Land that's in their Torah and
it's the same Holy Land. It's the
space
same
of
temple.
land that
It's
is
the
now
same,
Israel.
Absolutely.
That's the space.
Absolutely. So you can take it historically and think, do they have a right to exist here in this land based on history? Yes. Based on politics? Yes. The UN decided to vote. The community of nations voted and said the Jews get to have a land in the Middle East.
Right.
You can take it spiritually and say, what did God promise Abraham? The land of Israel. Right. No matter what way you fry it, in my book, the Jews have a right to exist in the Middle East. They have a right to defend themselves.
Israel when God did this? Because I'm not a scholar like you are, and you shame me and embarrass me with how much you know. and I have to go repent here as soon as the interview is over. But so when God gave Abraham the land, was it called Israel?
At the time, it was probably called Rocks in the Middle of Nowhere.
Okay.
But it became Judah, and it became Israel.
Yeah.
No, it became Judah. It became Israel.
I'm trying to figure out, because I'm just some idiot comedian who's wondering if it's possible to find not an answer. If real smart people can't, I can't. But I'm curious, at least to know what really is true. So at least you're going to look at it and go, oh. So,
which, by the way, in America today, and certainly on campuses, truth is irrelevant.
It's irrelevant.
It's totally irrelevant, because your truth is your truth and my truth is mine. And let's all have truth.
And that's what
in our own universe.
That's what I have mocked in ridicule as a comic called.
Well, thank God someone is.
So I have that option. But okay, so excuse me because you're very articulate and smart, but I just want to make sure this is got, because I can't find these answers all the time. So Palestine.
Right.
I thought I read, because I do read and I do Google searches, and I believe that's academic now.
Right.
Is what the Romans called that area.
Right.
So it really wasn't historical. There wasn't really a historical Palestinian. In other words, if you lived there, you were Jewish, you were Palestinian. If you were an Arab, you were Palestinian. It was just the region. Yes.
No. It was the Jewish homeland. You can call it Israel. You can call it Judea. You can call it Samaria.
So where does Palestine come from? Where did that?
Palestine was a name that the Romans gave to kind of redefine it, to de-Judaize. If there's one thing the Romans, and by the way, the Greeks and everyone else that existed at the time of Jesus wanted to do, it was to de-Judaize everything. The Christian church became de-Judaized. The second any powerful leader came along that decided, you know what, I don't like Jews, but I'm going to take the Jesus part. So there's a history of Gentiles de-Judaizing things. Oh, it's called Judea? Why don't we call it Palestine? Let's rename it. Let's try to delegitimize any existence of a Jewish people here ever. Kick them out, disperse them, and so here they are reestablishing their right to self-determination, to a land, to a nation, to a language, to a safety.
Okay, so you're saying that then this sort of precedent for this is our land came from their holy book, their Torah, yes? About God gave this to them, here's what it is. So that's how they see that as the space. That's why they didn't go to Peru to find their land.
And you know what, actually, Zionism is not actually a religious thing. When Zionism began, kind of, there's two different kinds of Zionism. By the way,
I got to kiss you here in about 2 seconds. You're the first person that's going to tell me what Zion is. Every time I ask people, they go, we don't know.
Well, I don't know either, but I'm gonna make an attempt at defining it. Thank you.
What is Zionism?
What is Zionism? So there are two different forms. The Zionism that most of the church is used to is Christian Zionism, is religious Zionism. And it's based on what I said a minute ago. It's the idea that spiritually, in the Bible, in the Torah, in the Old Testament, God gave Abraham the deed, the spiritual deed, the permanent deed, the eternal deeds to this land. It's the idea that the Jews had a right to that land, whether they lived there or not, whether they continuously existed in the land
God's decree.
By
so
God's
this
decree.
Is their religious teaching.
Religious teachings.
Or tradition.
And a lot of Jews, subscribe to that thinking.
Yeah.
A lot of religious Jews subscribe to that kind of, what, God gave us this land, and thus, we have a right.
Which certainly gives it more weight and would give you more commitment.
Right.
Because now I can't just decide, nah.
Right, and there was a movement. There was a move to let's go to South America, or let's move to Alaska, and all the Jews will go to Alaska, and we won't be oppressed. But that's not right. Israel is the historic and religious heart of the Jewish people, and land has always been an important part of the Jewish tradition. A land, a place. For many reasons, Israel is the place where the Jewish people belong. Zionism, though, as it was thought up by Theodor Herzl, was a secular movement. Theodor Herzl was in France when a Jew was called out of the French military, and they accused him of a crime he didn't commit. And they said, kill the Jew, kill the Jew. And here Theodor Herzl's sitting, a secular man, an avowed atheist, and he's seeing the way that the Jew was treated different from everybody else. That guy's a Frenchman. He's lived here for hundreds of years. His family's been here for hundreds of years. And yet he's not good enough. The Jews aren't good enough. We're not welcome anywhere. Theodor Herzl had an idea. We deserve a homeland. We deserve a place to call our own. The idea of Zionism was born. The idea of Zionism is very simple. It's the thought that the Jewish people deserve the right to self-determination in their historic homeland. It's taken on many faces since, many names, many different streams have come up since that time. But Zionism, as it was originally thought, was a secular idea that was based on human rights.
Okay.
As the UN defines them, human rights, a right to self-determination.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, later on, like I said, the UN, politically, the community of nations decided the Jews have a narrative. They have a right to a homeland. We're going to call it Israel.
And they partitioned this
Two
area.
states for two peoples,
Yeah.
and you know, half of the people the Jews accepted, and the
Yeah.
other half decided that they were going to go to war. 6 Arab nations, but
Was the French Jew the Dreyfus affair?
yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to show you that I do read periodically.
Thank you. That's good.
It's Richard Dreyfus, right, in Jaws?
I think it.
Okay, never mind.
Maybe family. Maybe a
yes.
family connection.
So,
We're going to need a bigger state.
yes. All right, so thank you for having this sort of Zionism, and very interesting, because see, I thought it was more of this overreaching, God says, and so you shall have, and then you have no option. But
Right.
if you're saying that a man secularized it and basically gave it just some weight to the idea of unity as a Jew.
Right.
I deserve, like any other
Equal rights.
people group.
Which and you know, you look at Hollywood. Most of Hollywood is built on, you know, a lot of Jewish people are involved in Hollywood. Most of the songs way back in the day before Israel are about Israel. There's a place for us, a time and space for us. You know, a lot of the musicals, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, there's a land that I've heard of, Once in a Lullaby. The Jewish people have always had an awareness that there's a land for us. We belong. Through the pogroms, through the Holocaust, through the persecution, through the humiliation of being a Jew in Europe, of having your locks cut off and your wife being raped because she's a Jew, of having your children beat up in the streets because they're Jews, called every nasty, vile thing you possibly can. There was always this realization, spiritually and as a human, we deserve better than this. We deserve better. The spiritual people said, the Bible promised us this land, let's go back. The secular people said, let's go find a place where we can defend ourselves and build a life for ourselves that's not us being abused by every people group we ever find ourselves surrounded by.
Well, and as I tried to read and understand some of this, so I wouldn't sound like a complete moron, just partly, I almost felt like, because they never seemed to really have power, they never really had a space where they could say, here's when we control. We can have a history to look back and say, we can do this because we have this. I mean, maybe in some of these really stories of their conquering, but it almost seemed like they learned to survive in what I call, in my own political thoughts, an appeasement mentality. That they learned how to survive by never making waves. Yeah, we've lived for a couple 100 years. You want us out? Okay, just let us go. We'll see. We'll find another place, because they felt like they've never really been able to have enough power behind them and enough allies to allow themselves opportunities. So they've constantly been sort of vagrants moving around, and then they finally find this space, and they decided this is where we draw a line in the sand, or we're just never going to end. But there's another group.
Right.
And they did, in fact, live in the same area, similar historical times, yes. The Arabs, if we're using a Christian narrative, we have, the Jewish Abrahamic seed, but then, what is it, Ishmael created, the Arab line, yes. So they say, hey, we also, Abraham's our guy too, right? So I'm just trying to be honest.
Right.
Sometimes, see, what I find is to get anywhere in life, to actually be valuable, you have to decide that you want to believe what is true,
right,
not what you feel.
Right.
And because I'm demanded as a Christian that if the truth conflicts with what I believe, I have to change my belief.
Right.
But I see a new culture in America where if the truth conflicts with what I believe, I change the truth.
Right.
And so I'm not going to go for that.
Okay.
I believe in liberty and
That's
justice.
great. Yeah.
I believe in freedom and speech and so forth. And I chose this crazy topic,
right,
Israel, that I know a little bit about from my heritage as a Christian.
Right.
I've been taught, I will bless those that bless you. I will curse those that curse you. So I felt like, okay, well, I don't want to mess with them. So I almost felt like I'm supposed to have this sort of historical connection as a Christian to Jews and to Israel, right? But then I thought, well, who are these Palestinians? Who are these Arabs? They are getting killed. They are dying.
Yeah.
There is real war here. they're telling you, like you said, these terrible things that Jews are doing to them and this and that. And I say, okay, so there's got to be documentation. There has to be ways to define what is actually taking place and what isn't. So tell me what the Palestinians' view of their right to the same land is. And does it have any validity? Is there something about what they have that would demand a compromise? Or is this something that has been made up from whole cloth and truly does not have historical proof that we can look to and say, you belong here? Do you know that answer?
I don't know the answer.
No one does.
I don't know the answer,
Why
but
did
I have thought.
Why do I ask anybody
I don't know,
this
yeah,
question?
that's a
Because
tough one.
everyone has no answer.
That's
to
a
this.
tough one.
So if that's the case,
Right.
what gives Israel the right to say, then it's ours? If nobody knows, why can't the Palestinians be given equal fair treatment?
Right. Well, so let's talk about that. Oftentimes when people think about the history of Zionism, there's a phrase that's used. It's not used as much today, but it's still used in some circles. And it's Israel was a land without a people for a people without a land. Now the truth is, and truth is interesting because oftentimes it's kind of messy, but truth is truth. The truth is that there were Palestinians living in then Palestine, the Roman named Palestine. Mostly nomads and no real kind of nation, but people. There were people there.
They just were in the area, but they
were in
would
the area.
Put up a tent, then they'd move somewhere else.
Yeah, very nomadic kind
they
of.
Hadn't
maybe
created cities.
Right, not really, not really. It was a very nomadic kind of maybe even Abrahamic place.
Okay.
The Jews came from all over the place, and by the way, many Israelis are Persian and Iranian and Yemenite and from all over the Arab world, and they're as dark as any Palestinian or any Arab.
Okay.
Israel is this very diverse, dark Ethiopian and Arab and Arab Jews and Western Jews.
Ethiopian
Jews.
Israelites?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I didn't know that.
So these people moved into this place, and the UN partition guaranteed 2 states for 2 peoples. Actually, most of the land went to the Arab states. The Arabs had more pull in the UN than the West because there are many more Arab nations, and so the UN partition was very friendly to the Palestinian people, offering them equal treatment, equal land, political rights that actually would have maybe helped them to form a state that never had existed
Now, did they
before.
ask for this land, or it was just given to them? Because didn't they think they were part of Jordan?
Yeah.
Prior to that, so they never really asked for a state of their own. They always thought they were part of.
Well, they were kind of nomadic peoples that didn't really.
But
have
once
a
Israel came in, they said, "Well, now we're going to go ahead and claim."
Right, and politics is kind of a nasty business. And when the Arab world looked around and said, "Wait a minute, these Europeans are going to bring their democracy and their values, and Jews are going to come live next to me," politics gets in the way, and armies begin attacking from Egypt and Syria and Lebanon.
So were there no
Jordan.
Jews in the Israeli area all those years?
No, there were. There was a remnant of people living in Jerusalem, and Jews would make pilgrimages to Jerusalem to worship at the Holy Wall, and there was always a Jewish presence. Maybe not a Jewish state, always a Jewish presence, and certainly globally, the Jewish people had an affinity with the land of Israel, with the city of Jerusalem. You can't open the Bible in the Old Testament without seeing Jerusalem. By the way, many, many prophecies. Forget even they bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. There's promises. I know. Right. There are promises all throughout the scriptures that say you will re-inhabit the cities you once did. You'll replant the vineyards you once had planted. Water will flow from the desert. You look today at Israel, vineyards are being replanted. Water is flowing out of Beersheba, out of the middle of the desert, out of their version of Phoenix, Arizona. Rivers of water flowing.
How did they do that?
I think it's miraculous. It's the Jews are an interesting people, and Israelites are so innovative, so creative. Every challenge is immediately kind of mined for its worth. They don't let a trial go to waste. They don't let a difficult situation go to waste. They're oppressed. They move to Israel and they open up this democracy, this open democracy where everyone has human rights, everyone has equal rights. They move to a place without oil. They find creative ways to utilize the sun's energy and wind and diplomacy to get the energy they need. There's no water. They find ways, by the way, desalination was created in Israel. They find a way to desalinate the ocean. They find
they're
ways
the ones
to
that invented that.
Create drip irrigation. There are many, many miraculous prophecies that have been fulfilled in the land of Israel through the Jewish people. But regardless, the Palestinian people were there. Politics got in the way. Politics got nasty. And here we have now kind of a situation where you have a Jewish state and you have a quasi-Palestinian state that has a government, that has various ministries that deal with education and health and water. I've met with them. I've spent time in Ramallah with their leaders. I've met with many of the top upper echelon of Palestinian leadership. They have a very well-functioning government. Corrupt, really corrupt, but functioning and existing and working. And the Palestinian people have a nation that they never had before. They have a national identity that they never had before. They have political power on the world scene like few countries in the world do. The Palestinian people are they're a powerful people. They're a people that have a lot to talk about, and they have a heritage of which to be proud. But politics gets in the way. Politics gets nasty. They have a right to the land. They have a right to claim, I think, their territory, absolutely. And I think a two-state solution is something that should be pursued. A lot of people on the right will disagree with me, but I think there's neighboring people that want to have self-determination, and I think that's a right of the Palestinians, just as it's a right of the Jews to return and to create a nation for themselves.
Do you think Palestinians want a two-state solution? Do you think they want peace?
You know, it's interesting. If you poll Palestinians living in the West Bank, the answer is no. But this is a people who have been indoctrinated. You read through, you can do your own research. You read through the textbooks in Palestinian public schools, and anti-Semitism is every other page. You know, it's anti-Semitic jokes. You spend time in Ramallah, and there are anti-Semitic jokes. There, you know, the anti-Semitism is kind of the culture that's been built. So you think about if you grew up looking over the hill and your dad saying to you, "We hate them, we hate them." What do you mean make peace with them when you're 30 years old?
Yeah.
I grew up hating them. I don't know why I hate you, but I do, and I want you dead. Maybe not all, but I hate your guts. You know, so polling on that side of the fence says, no deal, don't make a deal. And the Palestinian leadership have been too busy siphoning funds, siphoning international money to build palaces in Ramallah or buy condos in Paris. Yasser Arafat has a beautiful condo overlooking the Eiffel
rhetoric.
Tower.
This is
reality.
Yeah.
This is reality, and that's the thing. Truth is truth.
Yeah.
You know, it transcends politics. Truth is oftentimes messy, but truth is truth.
Yeah.
And the thing I think that's interesting is, as a Zionist, as a supporter of Israel, I can speak truth because I'm totally confident at the end of the day, after all facts have been shared, that the Israeli narrative, the Jewish narrative, will come out on top. You know, but if you ask Palestinians in the West Bank or in Gaza, do you want to make peace with the Jews? After decades of indoctrination, the answer is clearly no. Ask Palestinians in Jerusalem, do you want to be a part of a Palestinian state or be an Arab citizen of Israel? Margins are huge. Let me stay in Israel. I want to make money. I want to have a protected place to raise my family. I want to have access to clean water. I want to live in this developed, incredible country where I have equal rights. So it's interesting. You know,
will they say that? Would they say that on camera?
Probably won't go on CNN and say it, but you know, if a Frank Luntz did a private poll, I think the results would be compelling.
So why couldn't they tell people, if they would be the ability to tell the rest of their people that they care about, no, it's good over here?
Well, think about being
why can't they
think about being a white person in Savannah, Georgia in the 1930s, and you think it's abhorrent what's happening to African Americans. Are you going to be the first person to raise your hand and say, let's end this system of oppression?
They would be in danger, maybe, of
it's not a safe thing to do. Politically, it's impossible for a Palestinian to stand up for themselves and to say no to this. There's an Arab Christian in Nazareth, Father Gabriel Nadaf, and he advocates for Arabs joining the IDF, and let's defend ourselves, because this isn't an Arab versus Jew issue. This is a civilized versus Hamas issue. This is a Western kind of democracy versus the Stone Age. Let's stand up for ourselves and defend ourselves and be proud citizens of Israel. He's threatened on a daily basis. People take bats to his car in Nazareth, Israel, in a very Arab part of town. But it's not a tenable thing. As an Arab in Israel or in the West Bank, politically, it's very, very tough for you to stand up for yourself.
Well, so I'm guessing you would say that Israel's not an apartheid state.
No, absolutely not.
How did they come up with that concept?
Because again, you know, Saul Alinsky, he's a really brilliant, I don't know if people know who Saul Alinsky is, but I've researched some of his methods and have read about him, because in my mind, what's happening at places like UCLA today is not so different from what Saul Alinsky taught radicals to do back in the 60s. The key to Saul Alinsky's tactics are symbols. The Palestinians and their supporters in this country are masters of using symbols to advance their dialogue, to advance their narrative. A picture of an Israeli soldier standing over a village protecting it. Forget the context, forget the 30-minute video showing that he's patrolling and laughing and handing out candy or whatever. The symbol speaks much more than arguments ever can.
Mm-hmm.
Young people on campuses, they're not really worried about the truth. They're not really worried about the facts.
Right.
They're worried about symbols and emotion, and
Yeah.
we're a different generation. I'm not, and by the way, I don't think my parents' hippie generation was much more thoughtful than we are, but I mean, we're much more emotional, and I want to feel good,
Yeah.
and a symbol like that makes you feel bad, and it makes you empathize with the David and hate the Goliath. And so what the Palestinian people have been able to do brilliantly, and I think people on Madison Avenue should take note because they could really do some great advertising. But the Palestinian people have been able to sell themselves in the international scene as an oppressed people who are being oppressed by white Europeans. That's the narrative that goes. And so the truth doesn't matter. The truth doesn't matter. Get a symbol and run with it.
Yeah.
False, true, otherwise, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
As long as you're getting people behind your movement,
Right.
agreeing with what you're saying, rallying the troops, which is why at UCLA, when the Palestinian students have a rally against Israel, you see all different kinds of people showing up because the symbols are so powerful. The truth isn't powerful. The truth doesn't matter to most people on campuses, but the symbols of what Israel represents
Right.
in their mind. And so, they've created this false narrative, this false myth.
Yeah.
I encourage anyone to go to Jerusalem and to walk along the streets and document the number of Arabs you see versus Jew. It's going to be 50-50. You're going to see a Jew, and you're going to see an Arab, and you're going to see an
And they're getting
African
along.
American, and you're going to see an Ethiopian Israeli, and you're going to see I mean, it's so diverse. It makes, I think, New York look like a kind of a white suburb.
But propaganda is irrelevant if it's not disseminated. So someone within the culture of media, I'm talking worldwide, must be in some ways sympathetic to this to allow that type of, if you're saying that this is pure propaganda, that this picture is a symbol, but in fact the guy was not doing this. We see a house bulldozed because he was involved with a terrorist, and they give the illusion that there were babies in there with babies and holding babies, and
Right.
it was a baby
Right.
fat place. There was nobody in there. So it's propaganda. But if I'm not seeing it on television, if I'm not
Right.
seeing it in newspaper and magazines, it's irrelevant.
Well,
so who is facilitating this?
Two things. Number one, the IDF makes mistakes. This is a military created by human beings with human beings at the operating thing. And by the way, there's 18-year-olds in highly volatile situations trying to defend their communities and trying to do everything right. And people are going to make mistakes. And when they do make mistakes, you better believe you're going to hear about it. Every mistake an Israeli's
Yeah.
ever made has been made international headlines and is on the cover of the New York Times. Here's the thing. People like to think of the Jewish people as this incredibly powerful, the anti-Semitic kind of thought is that the Jews run the world and they run Hollywood and they run banking and they run politics and they run everything. Okay, let's think about demographics. How many hundreds of millions of Arabs are in the world? How many hundreds of millions of Muslims are there in the world? How many billions of people? More than a billion Muslims in the world. More than a billion. Every one of them kind of basically as a tenet of their faith can't support Israel, can't support the Jewish people. It's a historic thing, it's a political thing, it's a reality thing. There are 6 million Jews in Israel and about 6 million everywhere else in the world. There's 12 million Jews in the world.
That's it?
There's 12 million Jews.
I didn't know
And so you think about the demographics of how many, look about the media power behind the Arab world. Think about Al Jazeera, which is run by Qatari business people and politicians. Think about all of the ultra liberal media who have made that narrative we talked about earlier part of the mainstream conversation. And then think about Israel, this young kind of dynamic country that's making mistakes as it's growing, but it is built on ideals, I think, that are incredibly Western and incredibly moral and incredibly democratic. Right. I think they're right. They're going to have a more difficult time getting their message out than the empires of the world who have narratives to keep up within their countries and amongst their population. So it's an uphill battle. I mean, people like to think Israel is all-powerful, almighty. It's the size of New Jersey. It's a tiny country with 6 million people living in it, a third of whom are Arab. It's a different David and Goliath story. So again, let's think about the Zelensky kind of symbol of an IDF soldier pointing a gun. Well, let's zoom out and look at the Arab world that surrounds Israel. They're surrounded by hundreds of millions of people who politically or otherwise have called Israel and the Jew their enemy. And so Israel's up against this really powerful narrative. People like to think of Israel as the Goliath. The reality is Israel's the ultimate David yet again.
Right, and that's what I would think that people would see them as, like you said, self-reliant. You should be wow, look what these people have done under these extraordinary circumstances.
Right, and even
they should be inspirational.
And for left-wing values, you think about the far American left, and most Democrats are very supportive of Israel, and I am so appreciative of that. Most Republicans are very supportive of Israel, but kind of on the fringe of both, there's kind of anti-Semitism on the radical right and kind of this anti-Israeli kind of thing on the radical left. But if you look at Israel, there's something for everybody. You think about their left-wing values of equal rights for all, and they take it all the way, equal rights for all. Everybody gets rights in Israel. Everybody gets rights.
And where did that come from? Where did they acquire that kind of idea of equal rights? Do you think it's because of their experience historically?
It could be. You know what? I can't give a straight answer to that, but I would imagine that as a people who have been so oppressed for millennia, that they're going to be sympathetic to any other people who claim the narrative of oppression.
Right.
By the way, you look in Jerusalem, there are many, many NGOs that work to advance the well-being and rights of the Palestinian people. Many, 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 many. Amnesty International and the United Nations and all these people that are radically anti-Israel are allowed to operate from within Israel to help the Palestinian people. You go to Ramallah, Palestine, everywhere, NGOs, UN funding, billions of dollars being poured into that for infrastructure development and for water research and for education and
Is the UN sort of in the middle on that, or do you think they lean Palestinian, Israel?
Again, it's a demographic issue. How many Arab countries sit in the UN? I don't know the answer to that, but it's a lot more than one Jewish state.
Yeah.
And then because of the Islamization of Europe, many of their political realities are shifting. So now you have maybe anti-Semitic European kind of ideas mixed with this new kind of influx of Muslim immigrants from around the world, and so Europe is shifting, and Africa is shifting, and the Middle East has always been. So Israel faces a demographic reality in the community of nations, where yet again they're the only one, and thank God the United States has always been supportive. And
why?
You can think about it religiously. You can think about it in many ways. I think most importantly, though, it's a values thing. Israel is, by every measure that I can think of, a Western democratic, American type country that respects the rights of minorities, that allows for freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly. You look at the founders of Israel were really inspired by Thomas Jefferson and by Benjamin Franklin and by George Washington. They thought it was great. Funny thing is, look back to Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and George Washington, and they were inspired by the story of Moses coming from oppression into the promised land. So it's kind of this self-fulfilling thing of the United States was built on kind of the mythology of Scripture of escaping from oppression into freedom.
Yeah.
And then a couple generations later, the Jews are looking to the United States as a model for building their own Jewish state again. So democratically, values-wise, Israel and the United States have so much in common. We can't help but to support them.
Do you think, though, that we also look at them as strategically access to the Middle East if we needed to go in and fight or take over some scenario?
You're going to get a million perspectives. You're going to talk to the politicians and hear the political reasons why we should support them. You're going to talk to the religious leaders and hear the religious and spiritual reasons. You're going to talk to the military and see the strategic benefit of having an ally like Israel in the region, which is on the front line of our fight against radical Islamic terror. You have ISIS on the border. You have Al-Qaeda on the border of Israel. And Israel, as the last kind of defense of the Western world, saying, no, we're not going to put up with this.
Yeah.
So strategically and politically and spiritually, Israel's an important and even invaluable ally for the United States.
So quickly, if you can, because you obviously know your stuff, when you think of Israel and when you think of the hot places that constantly come up, give us a little quick overview of why do we constantly hear Gaza Strip,
right,
West Bank?
Okay.
They seem to be something significant about those two spaces. What is that?
Well, the Gaza Strip is a place on the it's on the southwestern border of Israel. They're between the Mediterranean, kind of bordering Egypt and Israel there in the south, and it's a really small strip of land. I mean, very, very small. I don't know the exact square mileage. I want to say it's 5 miles by maybe 20 miles. Very small. There's about 2 million people living in the Gaza Strip. And the Gaza Strip government is run by a radical Islamic, Iranian-funded organization called Hamas. Hamas is political Islam. It's a theocracy there. It's run by radical Islamo-fascists who abuse and oppress their own people. It's a place that not even Palestinians from the West Bank feel comfortable going. I mean, there are death threats out for Mahmoud Abbas and for his leadership and Fatah in the West Bank. It's a very radical, very backwards, I would even say Stone Age place. By the way, filled with a lot of innocent people who aren't being only, put up against the wall by the political realities and the threats posed by their government to Israel, but also by their own government. They're oppressed on a daily basis by their own government. Forget education and water and energy. It's like it's a survival mentality because their government is so radical. Even Egypt is raising houses on the border. Egypt doesn't want anything to do with Gaza. They're clearing entire neighborhoods on the border just to make sure that the Hamas radical mentality doesn't seep into their country and destabilize their government.
Now, was this a piece of land given to them by the UN, or how did they?
No, Israel was there,
that?
and Israel decided to evacuate the territory as a gesture of wanting to make peace with the Palestinian people, of saying, look, we'll give you this land. We'll give you an opportunity to develop a government here and to try to function and
so no
thrive
Jews
and succeed.
live in the
They used to. There were settlements there, but Jews have since been removed. That was back in 2001, I think. They left behind tremendous infrastructure, greenhouses, energy, water, sanitation facilities. They left behind tremendous infrastructure that was immediately destroyed. I mean, the Hamas government has such a disdain, such a hatred for Jews that transcends even like basic logic, that they just destroyed everything. They knocked the houses down, knocked the condos down because it's Jewish. We don't want, So that's the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip's run by Hamas. Hamas is oftentimes the government, the military wing of kind of political Islam that is launching rockets and pressuring Israel from the south. They're funded by Iran. Their missiles come, through the Egyptian border via Iran. It's an Iranian terror proxy in the south of Israel, just there to cause pressure and make sure Israel knows that if Iran ever yanks the Hamas chain, that rockets will go flying into Tel Aviv and into Jerusalem and certainly into Beersheba and in the south of Israel. The West Bank is on the west bank of the Jordan River. And it's kind of a large piece of land. I mean, if you look at a map of Israel, it's two kind of big bumps in the center of Israel, kind of in the heart of Israel. Some people call it Judea and Samaria. Other people call it the West Bank. And that's really the heart of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian nation. And the Palestinian people living in that territory, they are being indoctrinated against Israel. They are being educated against, I think, from a peaceful resolution. But they are, by and large, a peaceful people, that are, again, oppressed by their own government and are victims of a government that's more focused on their worldly ventures than on the good and success of their own people. When, the per capita income is somewhere closer to $3,500 a year per capita, and your president, democratically elected president, is living in a castle overlooking, a castle palace overlooking Ramallah, I think there's an issue. Most often with negotiations, it's a West Bank Israel issue versus a Gaza issue.
So if Israel reached a place where they said, just too much pressure, too much potential death, we're sick of this, no matter what we do, where we go, whatever we tried, we have discovered a giant piece of land in South America, we're going to leave. We're going there, nobody's going to bug us, and they left. What would the world be like?
That's an interesting question. I can't claim to know, but what I do know is that will never happen because the Jewish people have a history in the land of Israel that so transcends any pressure that anyone can.
So there is no give.
This is it.
If there's going to be an apocalypse, if there's going to be the final,
the Jews will be in Israel. Yeah. This is it. This is it.
Okay.
This is where they belong. This is the only place in the history of the Jewish people where they've ever been safe. You can't name a single place in the world.
When you say that to me, and we know Palestinians feel the same way, then it's got to come to a head.
Well, I don't know if the Palestinians feel the same way.
Well, as far as they're not going to give up.
Nobody's going to give up. No one's giving up this struggle.
So have we truly found a warring faction of groups that truly there's no solution?
I don't know.
Unless one wipes out the other.
Well, yeah, and that's not going to happen either. But I think many people think that the resolution will come at the end of days, whatever that looks like. I don't know if a peaceful resolution will ever happen. I think today you have a sustained peace that transcends most conflicts in the history of humanity. You know, and actually in the scope of things, you know, this conflict that's raged for 67 years, you know, it compares with many other conflicts of peoples that have not quite gotten along in the same neighborhood but have been forced to remain. And so I think, you know, many of the naysayers and doomsday kind of people say this is the longest ever conflict and it's never going to end. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think anyone knows what the history will bring. But I'll tell you this, I don't have any faith in the Palestinian leadership to advocate truthfully, morally, and righteously for their people. I just don't see it. I don't see a generation being developed of Palestinians who will do those things. I don't see
What you mean,
it.
compromise and give peace and not expect that there's something inherently wrong if they give Israel something, you know, that they're, because it seems like there's almost inherent in their culture is to give any pass to Israel is like suicide, because even if like an Arafat was to say, I'll accept your, was it 2001 where they were given the best shot they ever had. Here's 90% of what you want over here. And he said no, fearing, apparently, which I think we saw in Egypt, if a Muslim does try to give them some kind of
there
grace,
are problems.
They're killed.
Well, yeah, and you know what? That's actually happened. That's happened on the other side too, with the radical right in Israel, and that's talked about less. But you know, I think it's with the Palestinian people. You know, especially Mahmoud Abbas, he's really backed himself into a corner. He fired all his best aides that were looking at ways to make peace. He hasn't developed a system in which Palestinian people feel like they're safe and protected and economically secure. You know, that's not a way to build peace. Yeah. You know, he has an opportunity to build a nation. He has the resources of the world coming into his little strip of land that's not that many people, to build roads and to build schools and to develop an infrastructure that can sustain peace. And he's choosing not to do that. He's choosing to go around and to do baboon stuff all over the world and in the UN and, you know, all over Europe and all over the Middle East. So he's missing his window of opportunity, I think. And looking behind him, I don't see any Palestinian leader who can claim the throne, if you will. And so, you know, do I think peace is attainable in the next 30, 40 years? I don't think so. Could be wrong. Hope I'm wrong, but I really don't think so. You contrast that with an Israeli people who are exhausted. They're tired of conflict. Yeah. But you know what? They're not going to go make a stupid peace deal to appease anybody. It's going to have to be a platform and a plan for real sustained peace and security for both peoples. And if it's not, the status quo will have to continue on, which in the grand scheme of things, the status quo today is actually not a non-tenable kind of idea.
2 more questions. What, if you were to pick one negative or perhaps where you could look at and fault Israel, if we're trying to be honest and seek truth, then nobody's perfect.
Right.
What would you say is their greatest flaw or mistake, perhaps, in trying to garner, you know, sympathy from folks?
Yeah, you know, again, the Israelis, they're human beings, and the IDF and every aspect of their society is built with human beings who are sure to make mistakes. It's not an if, it's a when. You know, the IDF, they have tactics that I think are over the top. You know, there are things that they do that I think, why are you doing that?
What would that be?
You know, I don't think the occupation is terribly comfortable in the West Bank. I don't think
so
it would
they
be
are
comfortable to live.
Because that's what that's.
Well, there's a military presence in the West Bank that ensures security and that ensures that you know, buses don't begin blowing up again in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv, which was a reality not that many years ago. Not that many years ago, you couldn't go into a cafe in Israel without first calling your mom to make sure that you told her you loved her. Wow. You know, there are things that have happened in history that have led Israel to the place it is in today. You know, I don't think it's terribly comfortable. You know, there's no perfect solution. There's no perfect answer to the conflict we see today. And I don't think it's fair to fault Israel for the strong military presence. I don't think it's right to fault them for that. But you know, there are tactics that the American military uses in Iraq and Afghanistan that I think are, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they're doing that. Yeah. And it's dealt with. And let me tell you, when there are issues in Israel, when there's abuse of power by an IDF officer or anyone else, there are tribunes brought together, and there is a due process for the victim, and most often there's a resolution that's oftentimes friendly for the person that's been victimized. So Israel's not a perfect place. They make mistakes every second of every day, as every country, every person does. But you know, I think the again, the fundamental values of Israel, the morals of Israel, I think transcend any mistakes they make because they're in the right, from my perspective, on all those things.
Then you get to answer the ultimate question based on the history of Jews,
Right.
Israel, Holocaust,
Right.
driven out of place, what medieval, Christian, our people's anti-Semitism and its history and the crusade, well, not crusades, but the, what was it, the Monty Python did one, Spanish Inquisition. That's
And
how
the Crusades, by the way, the Crusades, by the way, were no better. They were burning synagogues and raping and pillaging on the way to Jerusalem, and Jews were, on the wrong end of that deal.
So I mean, so if there's any, and I've said this to a few of the people because I don't, and maybe I'm wrong, but I said I don't know if there's ever been a documented lineage of a persecuted people group that we have a history of, like the Jews. I don't think there's any, I mean, that's like you can see it over and over, and even in their own book, that was kind of for them. They show the good, the bad, and the ugly. Where they failed, where they ran from God, where they said, forget it, you got us out of there, but now you've ruined us again. I mean, it's like you almost like you can see them going, well, maybe you deserve this, because you people are always complaining. But, and then, they have the fiddle on the roof, and, for the chosen people, I wish you would have chose somebody else. Explain to me a Noam Chomsky, numerous Jewish intellectuals who are almost pathologically anti-Semitic,
Right.
anti-Israel anyways. How can you reach that space? You're around Jewish people. You've certainly been around them in Israeli elements, in American Judaism. Maybe that's different. What in the world would cause a Jewish person to want to sabotage Israel?
Yeah, I think that he's specifically referring to someone like a Noam Chomsky or his contemporaries, and there are many. There are many. Thankfully, there are more, I think, Jews that stand with Israel, many more. But there are the occasional Jewish intellectual who just can't find it within himself or herself to support Israel, to stand with Israel, to even think about the existence of a Jewish state. I think it's a question of priorities, because for these people, their identity, their careers, their mentality, their worldview is more leftism than Jewish. I mean, they prefer to prioritize their left-wing values. That's their religion.
Yeah.
That's their religion. Their left-wing values, their kind of worldviews are what they focus on, and anything that collides in any way with their view of the world is unacceptable. So even if they have the Jewish identity thing and the Jewish history thing, and they know the history of the Holocaust, and they know the history of the oppression of the Jewish people, and they know the reality that Israel's the only place in the world that ever has accepted Jews and celebrated Judaism. And even if you aren't religious, this is a political miracle. Who would have thought that a people would have climbed out of Holocaust camps, literally, with literally the rags on their back, and they would move to the middle of the desert in the middle of the Middle East with zero natural resources, and today you're looking at one of the great developed countries in the world. Who would have thought? It's a political, it's a human, it's a spiritual, it's a prophetic miracle. So when people miss that, it makes me tremendously sad. And that's left-wing Jews, and that's Palestinian Arabs, and that's left-wing Christians, and that's anybody. If you're not realizing the miracle of this story, you're missing out on one of the great epic sagas of humanity. And that's on you. You can miss out all you want. I'm going to watch it and enjoy it and appreciate it and celebrate it until the day I die. Because again, it is one of the great miracles in the history of humanity.